Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. More than 13 years of civil war have left Syria in ruins. And now with Bashar al-Assad ousted, a new government is trying to pick up the pieces. One of its first moves is to push to remove international sanctions to bring in foreign investment. Global support is already trickling in, with the EU and UN pledging billions in reconstruction aid. But this transition has done more than just reshuffle power in Damascus. It's weakened Iran's grip on Syria and Lebanon, creating new space for other regional players. Saudi Arabia is reportedly preparing to pay off Syria's World Bank debts, a move that could unlock even more funding, especially in reconstruction. And in his first official visit abroad, Syrian leader Ahmed Shara traveled to Riyadh and Ankara, a sign of the roles Turkiye and Saudi Arabia could play in shaping Syria's future. But can these two countries, often with diverging interests, find common ground and help stabilize the Middle East in the process? For more, joining me now from London is Chris Doyle. He's the director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. From Doha, Ali Bakir, an assistant professor at Qatar University. And from Geneva, Switzerland, Danny Albaj, vice president at the Syrian Forum. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. Now, Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, I think any conversation about Saudi Arabia obviously has to start with the threats the country would face. And when we talk about threats from a Saudi perspective, obviously, we're going to be talking about Iran. So, Chris, right now with what's going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran, how do you view that relationship? There's been some diplomatic outreach at times, but it still looks tense.
It is a tense relationship. There's not a high degree of trust between the two parties, but it's much better than it was. And they have, shall we say, a working relationship. And I think what you see in Saudi foreign affairs is a desire to have a reset with a lot of its neighbors. So it is in the Saudi interest, as they see it, to try to bring greater level of security and stability to the region that would allow it to keep going with all its ambitious plans like the 2030 project and the like. So we've seen this reach out to Iran. Even before the fall of Bashar al-Assad, it had had a sort of rapprochement with the Syrian regime that was largely premised on Assad delivering on stopping the trade in Captagon. It obviously also had resumed relations with Qatar. So Saudi Arabia wants to have less issues with its neighbors. And in that, of course, it actually sees as really desirable, as from its point of view, stability and certainty within Syria, because the opposite, instability, a failure of this transition, could upend, its desire to see a much more stable region.
Mm-hmm. Ali, Chris called it a working relationship. Probably some manual labor in that work. A lot of cuts and bruises on the hands. So how are you viewing the relationship between Riyadh and Tehran?
Well, I agree with Chris on this matter. In fact, the escalation and rapprochement and obviously normalization between the two countries serve the interests of both of them. From the Saudi perspective, there is a need to de-escalate in the region, given that Mohammed bin Salman is focusing on his internal mega projects, and he needs not only internal stability, but he needs regional stability, and he needs bigger role of cooperation and coordination with the big powers in the region. And normalization with Iran from this perspective serves his interests very well. And on the other side also, the Iranians know that they cannot fight on several fronts, and they have been seeing the Israelis escalating in the last couple of years, and they want to protect their back. So their calculations mainly that it's important to normalize the relation with Saudi Arabia and de-escalate and to protect their back, at least in the Gulf, so that they can focus more on any potential escalation from Israel and the United States. So it's a working relationship. Both are satisfied with it, and I think that despite some challenges and despite the latest regional escalation from Israel in Gaza, we see that this working relation is still holding, and I think that it will continue this way, at least in the short and mid-term.
Danny, a lot's happened in the region over the past year. Iran taking a lot of hits, whether it's in Lebanon with Hezbollah, whether it's in Yemen with the Houthis, but probably the biggest hit in Syria with the ousting of Bashar al-Assad. Is this giving Saudi Arabia now more leverage? Is Iran weakened to the point where it really can't threaten Saudi Arabia anymore? Or is Iran still a force to be reckoned with in the region?
Iran is the biggest loser when it comes to the fall of the regime. Its roots and all the strategic plans for the region of what's so-called the axis of resistance has simply fallen apart. And the last link, or the geographic link between Iraq or all the way from Tehran to Lebanon, has been cut now with the fall of Assad. So yes, the leverage is way bigger when it comes to Saudi Arabia. And I believe in this regard, the Iranians have nothing but a clear interest into normalizing things and getting things better. Otherwise, their whole influence in the region, which is already decreased in a big way, will be simply terminated unless they do have another segue or another path through the region. And they see it clearly now that Saudi Arabia might be the one which will allow them a kind of a protection of certain interests for them in the region.
Okay, we talked about threats. Let's talk a little about opportunities. And I think Syria is a big opportunity for Saudi Arabia. After a very short wait-and-see period, it looks like the Saudis have engaged with the new administration. We've seen Ahmed Shara visit Saudi Arabia as well. There's been a decent amount of dialogue between the two countries. Chris, is this a new page for Saudi-Syrian relations?
There's certainly a new opportunity for it. And I think Saudi sees the chance to have an influence in Syria, as it used to many moons ago, and to shape, to some extent, the transition that's going forward. And it will want to see the sort of inclusive government in Syria that's actually going to lead to stability there. I think that most regional powers understand that Syria is simply not governable unless you allow all its differing components to have a say in the future of the country. So I think Saudi Arabia will want to show leadership in the region. It still has that ambition. Syria is a key power, potentially, and Saudi Arabia will not wish to leave it to others to be the sole determining powers as to the future direction of Syria. And it will see also in that, struggle with Iran, a desire to keep Iran out of Syria, to make sure that Iran doesn't become a very dangerous spoiler. Yes, I totally agree with the previous speaker that Iran has had huge setbacks in the last year, but it's still dangerous. It can still try to exploit any frustrations with the transition and what's going on in Syria to try to disrupt it, to try to make it fail, frankly, and then to exploit the opportunities. We've seen this time and time again with the Iranian regime. And I think, therefore, Saudi Arabia needs to work with other interested parties to try to ensure that this transition works. Because if Syria does recover, if it does acquire a degree of stability, and nobody's pretending that this is going to be easy or it's going to happen in a few weeks. It's a long-term process to recover the economy, to heal society, frankly, to get to a situation where expatriate Syrian refugees feel comfortable about getting home. So it's a long-term project, and Saudi Arabia hopefully will have the patience to be there to assist in that. But as with all external parties, not to go too far and interfere in a way that limits the ability of Syrians themselves to determine their own futures, because that is what has been missing so often, particularly under the Assad regime, external interference being very much for the narrow interests of those external powers.
Ali, if Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman had a geopolitical checklist of what he hopes to accomplish in Saudi Arabia, what's on that list?
Well, let me tell you first, just to make a comment on Saudi's position concerning Syria. I mean, since 2016, Saudi Arabia withdrew from Syria and even tried to normalize afterwards with Assad regime to cut its regional losses. However, when Assad regime was toppled, Saudi Arabia swiftly embraced the situation. It didn't adopt a wait-and-see strategy. It was the UAE who did this, but Saudi Arabia swiftly embraced the change and tried to help the current administration to navigate the challenges internally and externally. Why? Because Saudi Arabia has obviously a great interest in stable Syria. Also, knowing that Assad was toppled and they didn't invest in this, it's a free win for them. The fact that Iran is no longer exists in Syria is also a free win for them. They didn't have to pay for this. Other countries like Turkey, like Qatar, they maintained their position and they had the biggest burden in the Syrian issue. So this is a free win for Riyadh, and they would like to capitalize on it and to cash it in, whether in their regional calculations or internal calculations. However, and I agree here with Chris that Iran still have the chance to come back, whether in Syria or other countries. However, and ironically, the Israeli policies currently in Syria, which basically destabilizes the internal situation, tries to undermine the current government and expands its occupation, might ultimately help Iran to come back if it stays on this course. So from the Saudi perspective, the current challenge in Syria is not about internal governance or about Iran anymore. It's mainly about the necessity to remove U.S. sanctions on Syria, because no matter what the Syrians do on the political, economic, and security level, if the sanctions are not removed, then things are going to get really bad in the future. And second, the Israeli rampage and the Israeli policies in Syria is a great challenge, not only for the Syrian government, but also for those regional powers who are interested in a stable and secure Syria free of Iranian influence and terrorism, which is mainly Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Qatar, among other countries.
Danny, I want to flip the question around. What is the Shara administration expecting from Saudi Arabia? I mean, is this kind of like a show me the money type of situation, or does Damascus want much more from Saudi Arabia in the relationship?
No, not more. I mean, historically, if you look at the region, when it comes to the balance of power, it used to be a historical triangle of balance that was based on Damascus, Riyadh, and Cairo. Now, with the changes that came with the Arab Spring and the emerge of new interests, let's say, from Turkey, when the Turkish government started to look south, as they call it, and tried to go for a zero-problem diplomacy, as well as the emerge of Qatar as a new player in the region. This has came into a shuffle eventually with the topple of the regime now in Syria. Syria wants to replay that role, however, thinking of a wider balance alliance that would go to Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. So partially, they want from the Saudis to support such a role if it comes in the future. It's not only money, it's again stability, it's good relations with the U.S. administration. Nobody can deny that if it wasn't for Saudi Arabia stepping up and saying that we want Syria to be present at the spring meetings for the World Bank and the IMF, perhaps a Syrian delegation would not even be there. So it's several, let's say, requests and assists that the Saudis can provide, mainly that the Saudi diplomacy in the region and the foreign or the regional policy in the region is basically that they want always stability. And as Chris mentioned before, and Ali, that this would push their 2030, for example, vision forward. Stability is the cornerstone for any Saudi engagement in the region. That's why they also see that if they can help the Syrian current government to provide the stability needed within the country, they can even provide more. So it's a two-side kind of two paths highway.
Chris, when you look at Ahmed Shara as a leader, his profile generally conservative, more religious, not the type of leader that the Saudi monarchs generally have good relations with. Bashar al-Assad is a profile, generally the type of leader that the Saudis prefer, whether it's Sisi or Assad or just more secular, more military authoritarian types. Can Shara be a better partner for the Saudis than Assad?
It's hard to know at this stage. I think most Syrians are trying to work out, indeed, the sort of governance that Ahmed Shara will bring, because obviously he was part of al-Qaeda. He ruled over Idlib in a very authoritarian style whilst being the leader of HTS. So there are still serious questions as to the sort of government that he will actually lead going forward. So that in itself obviously creates question marks for those powers in the region, including Saudi Arabia and others, as to how they are going to deal with them. But I think the bigger picture for Saudi won't be necessarily the individual. It will be how can it influence what goes on? How can it try to bring its diplomatic muscle, but obviously its financial muscle? It has some tools, some levers that it can exercise quite a significant degree of influence over this new government in the sort of directions that Saudi Arabia might wish to see. And I think that included, I hope, will be that absolute requisite need to include all communities within Syria, that we need to actually move into a future where everybody is signed up to this transition, happy with the direction it's going. I'm not talking about perfection. I'm talking about at least a situation that allows Syrians a degree of optimism that this very fragile transition is going forward. And if Saudi Arabia and other powers can play a helpful role in it, then brilliant. As for the individual nature of the relations, these relations are also very personal. I think it'll be very interesting. One talks about leaders, most of the leaders in the Middle East know each other pretty well. And indeed, for example, when there was a Saudi-Qatari blockade, part of the bitterness were those personal relations, how Saudi and the Emirates could impose such a blockade on Qatar, on their fellow Gulf Arab Muslims, for people who knew each other so well. Mm-hmm. So I think actually the personal chemistry between Mohammed bin Salman and Ahmed Shara will in many ways determine how they get on with each other going forward.
Okay. Ali, as Saudi influence is increasing in Syria, the Turks also have tremendous influence. Now, when these two influence spheres collide, is it going to be competition or cooperation between the Turks and the Saudis in Syria? Are the interests aligning?
Well, before I answer this question, just quickly, let me say that the West should learn from past experiences, and they should not judge anyone by the perception on him rather than by his actions, because as we all know, the Western capitals have been for so long promoting Assad as a secular, modern, and well-educated leader, and it ended up, massacring his own people and using chemical weapons against them. So when it comes to Ahmed Shara, I think, and this is my own perception, that and we are seeing his also actions on the ground, that he's a very smart guy, very pragmatic, and he's looking forward to work with everybody for the sake of the stability and security in Syria. And I think that they should utilize this to move forward and help the Syrians to be on the right track. Now, when it comes to Saudi Arabia and Turkey and their roles and influence in Syria, the narrative that there is a conflict between the two countries or competition on a bigger role in Syria is actually has a large audience in the West. However, in reality, there is no such thing, at least at the current moment. The two countries realize that they need to cooperate with each other in Syria, and also the Syrians know that they need all the support that they can get from all countries, not only from Turkey, not only from Saudi Arabia, not only from Qatar. So everybody needs to work together because competing agenda in Syria will ultimately undermine not only the regional powers, but also the situation in Syria. And we have seen this in Syria and other countries in the last decades. And I think that regional powers learned the lessons, and they are not going to undermine each other or the situation in Syria. They see Syria as an opportunity, not only to stabilize the country and benefit from this stabilization, but also to use it as justification for more bilateral and multilateral cooperation on the regional level. And I think both Saudi Arabia and Turkey are aware of this, and thus I think cooperation is very well needed and very well understood in both capitals as well as in Syria.
Danny, Trump's in power. He's obviously having an impact on almost every global issue. How will he impact Saudi Arabia and its relationships in the Middle East, especially right now, a possible deal with Iran being brokered, Saudi hosting the Ukraine peace talks, as well with the Russians and the Ukrainians, the Americans. So how do you see Trump impacting Saudi's interests in the region?
I mean, Trump never hidden that he has a huge interest in cooperating very closely with the Gulf countries, mainly with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is playing a broker role in not only diffusing, but actually very much in line with a lot of Trump policies in the region. So having an ally as big as Saudi Arabia, as influential as Saudi Arabia, would actually benefit both sides. Now, Trump has no interest now in Syria. Let's say the American strategy in the region does not really recognize Syria as a place neither to fight for or to fight on. So it will actually perhaps be very beneficial to the Saudis to promote certain visions about what role Syria could be played now. They are clearly rallying and pushing for the lift of sanctions because that would help accelerate destabilization of the country. So what I see is more that Saudi Arabia playing a good role with a change or influence a change with Trump's vision to the region, in particular when it comes to Syria, in order to reach the stability everybody's looking for.
Chris, while Saudi's trying to project its influence to the region, there's also countries trying to project their influence into Saudi Arabia, two of the countries that are very interested, obviously China and Russia. That doesn't make the U.S. pretty happy, does it? And how is Riyadh going to balance these relationships?
Well, I think it has a very pragmatic approach to these right now. I don't think you're going to see Saudi Arabia rebuff Chinese and Russian approaches. They will maintain reasonable relations. Of course, the Saudis know from a military security standpoint, the United States is still crucial to them because most of their weaponry is US-based and it costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time to move away from that. But I think rather than seeing all their eggs in an American basket, they're going to be somewhat more spread out. And if they do get to a situation, perhaps where they have a significant disagreement with the Trump administration, maybe over Iran or Syria or Israel, Gaza, then they have other avenues to go down to get support. So I think they're not going to be quite so dependent on the United States as they have been in the past. And I think that would probably be very wise, given the nature of the Trump administration. You're never really quite sure what you're going to have next. But just go back to the early point, I think that it is absolutely true, particularly at a moment where the Trump administration does not have a settled Syria policy. Many of the people that it needs to appoint to take over policy haven't yet been appointed by the president. So I think it's really important that those who really wish to see this transition work make overtures to the Trump administration to say easing of sanctions, particularly the banking sanctions, would really help the Syrian economy take off. I've just been in the northern part of Syria. The devastation, the cumulative devastation to the economy is just beyond description. And easing of sanctions, allowing transfers of money into the country, investments into the country, would really be, I think, in everybody's interest who really wishes to see stability and a brighter future for Syria.
Mm-hmm. Gentlemen, we're out of time. Danny, Chris, Ali, thanks for sharing your views with me. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.